Do you know if your Power Pages site is secure? Are you sure? Last week, there was news of a hacker group called Exfil Squad that targeted Microsoft Power Pages sites. Now, of course, the media likes to blow these things up and say that Power Pages might not be secure, but I'm here to tell you Power Pages is secure. However, you might have misconfigured it. So let's dive in and take a look. So I've configured a very simple Power Pages site. It is a pretty simple online ordering, and I'm not logged in. I am here as an anonymous user. I'm browsing through the catalog. I can view different products. So all pretty innocent, right? But let's just say that in the back end or even behind the authentication, that we have a developer that has set up something that uses the web API. And they have configured the web API to use contacts. I have nowhere in my cart, my catalog, or any of my navigation to get to contacts. Here's what I can do. All I've done is simply put in my URL, basically the URL /API/contacts, which is the table name, and did a select and was able to look at all the contact information in my Power Pages site directly from my Dataverse table. So if this is making you sweat a little bit, this is good. Let me show you exactly how that happened. If I take a look at my table permissions, so before we dive in, let's take a look at how Power Pages permissions, table permissions, web API permissions, and how that all works. So basically, you're going to come in and you're going to be visiting a website. Now, a couple different people can come in. There can be the anonymous visitor or an authenticated user, which is represented by a contact. And now there's new functionality coming out that is also synced with a system user. I'm not going to dive into that today, but I just really wanted to kind of highlight the anonymous visitor because this is where the security hole really lies. So first off, that security visitor or the anonymous visitor comes in and might request access to data. Now, they need to get that through a web role. Now, there is out of the box an anonymous user web role. This is something that comes with every configured Power Pages site. You need this for people just landing on your site, landing on the homepage, browsing a product catalog. They don't need to log in, these types of things. So this is what the anonymous user web role is. There's also the authenticated user, and there's also custom web roles, which I will touch on a little bit later. But again, let's just focus on that anonymous user, just a random stranger coming off the internet or a bad actor like from the Exfil Squad. Basically from there, if there is a related table permission, now table permissions are sort of the be all and end all for Power Pages security. So this is where you really need to put your focus. If there is a table permission with global access, because we don't have the relationship to a contact or an account or anybody else, there could be, through that table permission, full access to a particular table. So here, if it was the account table, it would have global access. If there was the anonymous user web role related to that, that would mean that that user could have potentially access to all the account information which is existing in the Dataverse table. And we can specify any of that information, but they would be able to access this. Now, so far, they only can access this through things like lists, forms, liquid. If something's written in liquid, that's how they'll be able to access it. The real danger comes with the web API. Now, don't get me wrong. The web API is a fabulous piece of technology. I use it all the time for a lot of things. However, misconfigured can cause a lot of issues. Very first thing, you have in order to use the web API, you need specific things like the site settings set to basically enable your particular table to be used by the web API and the particular fields. Now, up until this point, you could have used the wildcard character. The wildcard would have allowed you full access to all the fields in that table. And this is what's happening. The wildcard access has been given to the contact table. Therefore, if with that site setting being enabled to true and the wildcard character, all the access would be given. And if there was a get, meaning a read permission on the table permission, then that particular user would be able to access all the information. Regardless of what kind of user interface there is, they could be able to use that query within the URL and be able to get access to all that data. And all the rows, all the fields, all the columns from that information could be displayed and dumped out and used for bad purposes. And this is exactly how the hack happened. Is this group discovered that a lot of sites were configured to allow contacts to have full access through the web API, and were able to extract that information. So key thing here is, remember, permissions, table permissions really block the access to this. So you'll need to double check that. Anonymous always kind of uses global because it doesn't relate to a particular contact or user role within the Power Pages site. And all of these privileges add up. So you might have a contact that could have multiple privileges. It is always going to be least restrictive, meaning that particular contact portal user will have full access. So again, with anonymous users, this is something to really watch out for. So here, when we're specifically talking about table permissions, I take a look in my security in my Power Pages Maker Studio, or Maker Portal, whatever it's called, Design Studio. And this is a single page application. We have our table permissions here. We have the contact. We see we have global access set to anonymous users. So there's the first red flag. Double check this in your own site. If you see table and anonymous users, contact and anonymous users, definitely this is something you have to consider. Now, if we take a look at that particular configuration, we have read access. That's the danger part. I'm able to go in, put a query in, and read all of that contact information. And effectively, this is part of the issue. So here, if this was blocked, if this didn't happen, then no matter what I put in the URL, I would not be able to retrieve that information. So that's the first thing to look out for. Second thing to look out for is the web API setup. So if I'm here, I go into my Power Pages management app, I go into site settings. Let's just take a quick look at web API. And we see here we have our listing of the web API. So here, the very first warning sign, web API contact enable set to true. You know what? You might have a perfectly good reason why you want to enable the contact table for the web API. And that's okay. Depends on your user requirements. Plus you do have some other tables here that we will look at. But notice here under the web API contact fields, it is set to the wildcard. And this is a danger. This was part of the hack. This is the second part. The first part was the table permission, and the table permission being related to the anonymous role. And the final part here is with that star setting, meaning they could put in those URL commands or other ways through the browser and access that information. So how do we harden this? How do we, break it down, make it a little bit more secure? First off, the cool thing is Microsoft has patched this particular issue. If you leave this as star, no longer will you have access. So any new portal going forward will be blocked from using the star wildcard character, which is a good thing. If you have an existing portal, chances are this has also been blocked as of the last couple days. So that's good, but that might mean some of your functionality might be breaking. Good time as any to fix it. How do we fix it? You can reconfigure this particular web API setting to specify just the fields that you want to use the web API for. So what I've done here is I put in just the fields that I want to be exposed through the web API. I may or may not even want to do this. It's probably better not to have that on, but you have specific functionality. First off, you can limit the fields. The second thing you want to do is make sure your table permission is tied to an authenticated or a custom web role if you want to kind of limit this information a little bit further. So again, you need to go through and make sure that your data has not been exposed. If you want to limit how many contacts you want exposed, you can filter this using child permissions, meaning you could set up a custom table that you provide more open access to, but then use that child permission and only the contacts related to that parent record, whether it be account or a custom table, would have access through the web API. So there is ways to mitigate this information. I really just want to highlight the security risk so you can address it. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about web roles. So basically, if I go into the Power Pages management app and let's go under security, let's take a look at web roles. Out of the box, we have a number of web roles. Administrators more of a throwback. So we have the administrator's role here. That's more of a throwback for doing front-end editing. We have anonymous users here. Now, the anonymous users and the authenticated users are out-of-the-box roles. They do not need to have contacts assigned to them at all. Basically, if a contact automatically, all anonymous users will have access if you assign anything to this particular web role. Same with authenticated users. Now we have one here, a custom. Now I do want to open up something here. So if I open up this brand new web role that we created, a custom web role, here I want to have a catalog manager. I want it to manage catalog items and products. One thing that you might want to watch out for is this authenticated user role. You're thinking, yeah, catalog manager, I want authenticated users to use it. So I'm going to set this to yes. No, do not set this to yes. This is a big red flag. I've told Microsoft the naming convention is not good. You want to set that to no. What this basically means is, doesn't matter what contacts you may or may not assign to this particular web role. If it is set to yes, that means all authenticated users will have access to anything you give access to the catalog manager, regardless if they're linked or not. So leave this as no. The only two web roles that should have this set to either yes would be the anonymous users, and that should be set to yes, and the authenticated users should be set to yes for authenticated user role. Now, of course, when it comes to contacts, this is where they get assigned. So I could pick a particular contact. And if we using the portal contact here, this is where we would assign a particular web role to this particular contact. So that's the link for the custom web roles. If it's by default, all the contacts are automatically assigned essentially to the authenticated, and anybody visiting your site will follow the rules of the anonymous web role. Now, for your own custom thing, you might tell me, no problem. We have contacts locked down. We have accounts locked down. They're not being exposed. We're good. But we do have to expose our products in order to be on the catalog for anonymous users to browse. No problem. You'll go into table permissions and set those up. So we see here we have anonymous access to the product, global access read to the anonymous users. So that basically means all the users can read the product data, whether it's on a list or a form. And for the most part, that's okay. But if we're using the web API, and because this is an SPA, we are using the web API to read that data. We have code in the back that's reading the data. Again, you might think, you know what, product catalog, it's fine. I don't need to worry about it. So I'm going to I'm going to set the web API to go to all the columns, all the fields, because I really just can't be bothered figuring out which ones. Again, no. So here, if I look at the web API product fields, I've again set it to value star because you're thinking it's fine. All the columns should be exposed. No, you want to be very careful because here's what could happen. I'm back here on our site. We have the web API set up. I'm actually seeing the products here. But let's say someone comes along and go, wow, $119 for a Canyon day pack. I wonder if it's cheaper. I wonder how much it really costs them. So what they could do is go in and do the old API trick. And then here we've got a listing of our products, but then they could go in, here's the RBMS price. Well, if that's the price, I wonder if I could do cost. Ooh, look at this. We've got the cost. So we actually see that we're actually could be exposing very sensitive data as part of our Power Pages site, depending on how these column settings, these web API settings are set up. Again, take the time to make sure your security is configured. Now, if you already have portals out there, definitely look out for the */web API. Also, you could download this into Pack CLI, into Visual Studio Code, get your best coding agent, whether it's Claude or Copilot, to go through and identify this and update those site settings as a way to do this as well. There are ways to actually run a deep scan or a quick scan, which would actually expose some of this information as well. So here I have anonymous access to Dataverse tables. It is not necessarily spelling out which ones there are. If we have to go through the deep scan, which does take a few hours to run. But again, I would manually check it because some of these tools, they do work really well, but we want to be on top of that. Of course, there's other things being set up. There is within the security itself, there is advanced settings, there is the security agent. So we can run that for availability for vulnerabilities. So again, this is just something to be aware of, that there are tools that do exist, but at the end of the day, do some manual checking to make sure your Power Pages site is secure. Hope you found this video helpful. Hope you're locking down your Power Pages sites, because I really hate it when I see things in the news about Power Pages being not secure. Believe me, it is secure as long as you follow all of these common sense items.